So I've been a Fab fan for a long time. Anybody else here used the site, bought a product, spent $150 today recently? But maybe I'm just the only one who spent a lot of money today. So I think the most interesting part of Fab is how it evolved from something else, because as a lot of product people have experienced, sometimes the thing that you start with isn't the thing that you end up with. And fashionably, that's called a pivot, in case you didn't know. But I think you guys went through quite a major pivot, and it may have been just before your time, but if you wouldn't mind starting there, it would help lay the landscape.
Sure. There we go. So Fab was started by two folks, Jason Goldberg and Bradford Shelham, who've been friends for a really, really long time. And they had always kind of wanted to find a way to work together, and they'd done a bunch of very temporary ad hoc stuff throughout their younger years. But the first thing that they really dug in together to work on was Fabulous. And Fabulous was a gay social networking platform that grew to about 100,000 active users, but
like a Facebook type social network.
Does everybody? Does most people know what Grindr is? It was a less sexual Grindr.
Less grinding.
That was less grinding, exactly. And they tried, frankly, a number of different business models. They did gay Yelp, they did gay Fun, they did gay Foursquare, and frankly, none of them ever worked. And so one night at this very nice restaurant in the village, they got pretty toasted, and we're really just kind of thinking, okay, what's the next move? And what they really came back to, looking at their talents collectively, Jason has been an entrepreneur many times over, and Bradford was a design guru, interior design, furniture design guru, one of DWR, Design Within Reach's top salespeople, and the intersection of really what they both were talented at and they thought that they could build as a key differentiator was design. And so they shut down Fabulous. Jason went to the board at the time of Fabulous and said that he was going to invest $300,000 of his own money, and if they wanted to get out, they could, but that he was going forward with this. And everybody came in again for Fab. And so that is how Fab got started as a platform to help democratize design and to really show folks that design is not just Herman Miller. Design is not just Eames. It's not just your $2,000 chair. It's in everything. And there's an entire world of folks out there who are building products that are well thought out, that are based off of well-respected 100-year-old principles of design. And it spans the range of product categories. And these are really interesting people with really interesting stories to tell that are building great products that, even in some very, very mundane product categories, that can really help to inspire people and help brighten one's life.
So there's a couple of business lessons in there. One is always come up with your best idea when you're drinking.
Yes.
And the other one is follow your passion. Find out what you're truly passionate about. And then it seems to be that the passion idea extends to the users as well. These users, that the customers that are buying product from Fabulous are passionate about design, and they're buying product from people who are passionate about creating stuff through the design. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Fabulous. So the whole idea about connecting that passion to Fab, how did Jason go about doing that, or how did they both go about doing that?
Well, so they reached out to a number of folks that that Bradford had known throughout his career. Milton Glaser, great graphic artist of our time. A number of folks, and basically said, will you be part of our first day's launch? And really, the first day that launched, I actually think was probably one of its best product assortment days ever. It really represented like the ethos of what this was about, what it was trying to accomplish. It was bright, it was modern, it was fun. Some of it was pretty damn irreverent, and it really represented what this was trying to achieve. And with regards to like how the passion is part of it, I would just say that you have to. If you wouldn't use it yourself all the time, just get the fuck out, do something else.
So now you've come along, it's been around for a couple of years now, obviously grown. You're not a startup anymore. There's some external pressures to be who you are. What's it like?
E-commerce is very tough. There's a lot of pressure to have raised this much money and to be in a business. I always kind of equate an inventory modeled e-commerce business to be much like owning an airplane. All you have to do is sit there and you just piss money. And so in a lot of ways, it's very different. It's very different from a business like the one that you run. I wish I had that time to just sit back and think. There's something almost. I mean, there's a lot of startups, but particularly in e-commerce, there's a lot of clash between what I would consider to be best, taking a step back completely out of tech, what I would consider to be this is best in class design principles, and what one has to do in order to meet the rigors of a venture funded startup that is that needs to put out a minimum viable product in the shortest possible timeline consistently.
Right.
Yeah.
So before, when we were standing upstairs having a beer, because that's when the good stuff happens, and what we heard from some of the speakers here is there's this need to test things, need to understand whether something's working or not. But what I'm also hearing you say, and what we spoke about earlier, is you need time to think, you need time to step back, take a few moments to gather yourself and say, is this really worth doing? Is this a good idea? Do we really need to test another color blue?
No, I mean, it's hard, and I think, obviously there are business constraints and there are deadlines that will force an issue, but I think that, a startup mentality, you just kind of have to constantly remind yourself, and I always try to remind myself, I'm like, stop, like, put down the pencil, like, stop wireframing, go back. And I just have to constantly remind myself to do that every day, and I remind everyone on my team every day, I don't design anything. I want to talk about this for 3 days before anything gets created. And you just have to constantly force that, because there's an entire organization around you that is waiting for the designs. UX is, I think, is one of the most, probably in a business, it's probably one of the most criticized, most kind of, everyone looks at my Basecamp projects, constantly, and they're always talking to me about them. And
Scrutinized,
exactly. And everyone is always waiting for the next greatest thing. You have to just...
Because you've got the magic wand, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, and that comes back to a point someone made earlier about the UX being often a silo versus being more collaborative, and I think that's absolutely key. And I always try to start every project with my team, myself, going out and talking to the business owners and really understanding the business case behind it. And that's not always talking to the product manager. That may be talking to the head of women's buying, really understanding what this particular product is trying to achieve.
You've also got a team that's spread around the world. What's it like to herd those cats?
No, it's tough. There's a lot of Skype. So Fab has a 110 strong team in Pune, India. It's about a 5 hours drive south of Mumbai. One of the co-founders of Fab had run and owned a tech services company, full service technology, user experience, graphic design, the lot, for quite some time. And by the end of Fabulous, getting into the early days of Fab, we had been his only client for quite some time. And when I think it's probably been a year ago, we acquired them. And so I have a team of about 5 folks in Pune and then another team in the United States. It's hard, but it's also, it's absolutely critical because you need folks that are there with the developers. That's a must. Otherwise, the message is going to get lost. It's hard. It's honestly, it's very hard. There's serious trade-offs that are made, but honestly, if you are, we are a venture-funded business. That doesn't mean that we have billions of dollars at our disposal, and we're an e-commerce company that's built its own platform from scratch, warehouse management software, everything. We don't have Magento. We built our own version of Magento that lets us do whatever we want, but that's a huge undertaking. So that's a big part of the reason why the development team is based in India, because we build all our own technology.
So I'm going to borrow a question from the earlier panel. Somebody had asked, what kind of preparation do you need to be a UX person? And I look at you, you're a senior VP of user experience. How do you get there? Where do you start? How do you get there? What do you need to do on the way?
As how I got here, I'm honestly not quite sure. I was an architecture major at Stanford. And when I was out there, I was really, really inspired by the Silicon Valley environment, what was happening. And one of the things that I thought was really, really interesting was that I was doing internships at architectural firms, and I was looking. I was inspired and really enamored at the pace that they could move at. It had an idea and it was out there the next day. Architecture projects take years. It was such, the pace was really interesting to me. After college, I worked with some friends and built a series of interactive walking tour apps for European cities. This was back in 2008, when folks still paid for apps every now and then. We did that for a while, and then I came back to America, and a venture capital friend introduced me to Walt Doyle, who was the CEO of Ware, which is based here in Boston. And I really liked what he was trying to do. I liked his vision. I liked his insane energy. And I actually had a number of different roles there. I worked partly with the marketing team. I worked partly with the product team. I worked partly with the UX team, and really settled on those latter two for the latter half of my time there in product and UX. And really just kind of learn from the people around me. The designers, developers, product managers, and just, I don't think that UX is something that requires any sort of particular degree. I agree with what was said earlier, but it doesn't matter. It's a mindset, I think. A certain amount of empathy, I suppose. A certain design sense, a certain grasp of aesthetic beauty, and someone who likes to solve problems. Going back to that conversation earlier about the divide between a user experience designer and a product manager, it's entirely person to person. Some folks are totally off in one corner, and some folks are right down the middle.
This is a cycling geek question. But
Sure.
You used to cycle professionally.
Yeah, when I was in college.
So anything about cycling that's the same as what you're doing now?
Anything about cycling that's the same as what I'm doing now. It takes up the vast majority of my life. And my energy.
It gives you a couple of scars on the way.
Yeah, a couple scars on the way. Exactly.
Okay, total aside. So we saw a couple of hands going up when people are involved in the UX side of things. They're building stuff, they're creating stuff every day. But one of the skills that tends to be the most important is communication skills, being able to talk to others. Now, we know from the media that Jason's got a very strong opinion and that he's one of those founding partners that wants to be involved. He's got a hand in everything. How do you suggest to these guys what communication needs to look like, both up and down or laterally in the organization?
Sure. I mean, I think I'll start with upward. Upward depends on the CEO. There are some CEOs that really just want to see a pretty finished product, and that's the end of their involvement in UX, and maybe even product, especially if you have a real sales and marketing driven CEO.
Is that a good or a bad thing?
Is that a good or a bad thing? I think it depends on the product. Walt definitely fell into that spectrum. He was a great CEO for Ware. But if Jason was not who he is, standing over my shoulder every day, I don't think that Fab would be what it is, because no one has a better understanding for the business strategy and the 10-year plan than the CEO. So with regards to communicating upwardly, if you're assuming your CEO falls into the first category, honestly, I don't think there's a whole lot of interaction at all. They just want to hear a snippet, much like a soundbite. But for the latter, I mean, if that's their goal, then you need to figure out how to play with them. The story that I always tell people about, how do you and Jason work together? I say that I was the first person that Jason even really let in. He was doing it mainly himself before I came on board. It was that important to him. So if that's the case, then you need to be very, very careful about the way that you're presenting your ideas, and I think you just need to be also mindful that even for a CEO that's very interested in user experience, the reality is that they have 500 other things to do, and you need to be very succinct. Set up regular meetings where you're reviewing progress, asking for feedback. I think structure is the key. Structure and being succinct.
For those people who are not directly involved in UX but want to be, maybe there's some students in here or some folks who are just starting out. Any suggestions?
I would.
Don't do it.
Yeah, exactly. You mean as
Do
far as
something else.
trying to find their first job in the field, or?
Right, so maybe you're a programmer, maybe you're a designer, maybe you're a student. This sounds sexy, this looks cool. Is it? Is it a good idea? How do you take those steps to getting involved?
Sure. If you're already in a company where there are folks around you that are doing what you're interested in, first thing is just to talk to them. And if you're not, then you need use your connections and network and find people that are doing interesting things and get them to talk to you. That was one of the first things that I did after I came back to the States. After my first real foray into product and UX, honestly, after that, it was a very singular experience, and I still didn't really have a great deal of understanding for the breadth of it and what it meant to different people. And I called every venture capital friend that I knew. I called every technology friend, and I said, let's sit down and talk.
So, at least when Rob was introducing UX, it was, hey, there's this cool new thing called UX, everybody's excited about it. It's got to be incorporated into everything, but it's not new at all. It's been around for a while, and maybe it hasn't carried that title for a while. So, what made it so interesting after such a long time? Because we can go back to the mid-century stuff, where it was an important part of product design, and it kind of fell off the radar. What happened?
I think that technology plays such a role. Honestly, I would say that technology is playing such a role in everyday life in a way that it didn't 5 years ago, and 10 years ago, even less than 15 years ago, and in 5 years, even more so, et cetera, et cetera. It's becoming a part of our lives in a way that it wasn't before. And if you look at the ways that, Eero Saarinen or Charles and Ray Eames went around designing a chair, take a look into, some of the sketchbooks that have been published by them, or the thought processes, or, some of the interviews, you'll see that it's not all that different. I think that finally, within technology, it's just getting a name. And a group that is focused on actually delivering it. But to the point earlier that the panel was talking about, everybody is doing UX. I think it's really just a question of it's now becoming a part of a business that a group is responsible for in a very specific way. And I think the reason that that's happening is because there's a great movement I think going on right now that's about so much more than functionality. And I think that a lot of the beginnings of tech were all about that. And I think that's really changing. I think a big side effect of that happening is that user experience is finally, if you think about user experience, it's kind of ridiculous title for a group, isn't it? Because that's it. There's nothing else. And I think it's nice that within a product, within a technology organization, it's finally getting its day as saying, okay, like this is something that we really respect as a core principle of why we're building this. It's not just about the problem we're trying to solve, the functionality we're looking to create. It's about what's the problem, or what's the missing delight in someone's life that we're trying to create.
So another thing that Robin mentioned was, what data do you look at? And I think that there's a tendency for business people and analysts to want to look at the data, look at the things that they can touch and see the hard quantitative things that they can actually look at. But a lot of what we've been talking about is empathy and communication and passion. How do you think that all of those squishy, soft things are going to play out in a world where it's quite nice to have things in the little box?
I think that there are ways that qualitative feedback can be done well at scale. One of the things that I do a lot is we use NPS as well religiously. One of the things that I'll do pretty regularly is go through the responses and really filter down by, high value repeat customer, hasn't bought in 180 days, and then look for specific keywords within their response. Everybody knows what NPS is? Yeah. NPS is Net Promoter Score, and essentially what it is it's the simplest thing ever, and it's fantastic. It's a one-question survey that just says, scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend this product to your friends? And then it also below has an input field where tell us why you gave Fab a free. And what I do is I go through the system and I search for specific keywords, and then most of the time I get specific user behavior criteria. And I email those people, and I'm just like, hey, can we talk? Can we get on the phone and speak? And I find that is so effective. And it's not just about the feedback that you're receiving, but it also is so important to maintain that connection with your users on a personal level, and really understand who they are, understand their jobs, their lives, and what are they all about. Personas are interesting, especially at a large-scale e-commerce business, because really we want everybody to buy from Fab. And I find it's much more helpful for me to meet a person, not a persona, but a person, and really understand what they're about, what's their frustration, what do they love, what do they not love, how do they shop Fab, how do they shop other sites, why, and just hearing that type of one-off qualitative feedback, even though it's just one single user, and the case can and is often made that that is negated by the average that you get off of a million quantitative responses. I think it's still incredibly valuable.
So you've been around for a while, and if you're thinking about what the future holds, it's not incremental change, right? It's something pretty big. There's a big thing on the horizon for Fab. How do you get there? Think about maybe avoiding the rut of making those small button changes or the color changes, and think about the quantum leap to what makes Fab the next thing that's even cooler than it is today. How do you make those transitions, those big transitions?
Well, it's tough because obviously product roadmaps don't work that way. They work in these tiny little increments of whatever it is, a week, 3 weeks, 3 months. But that's about 3 months, I'd say, unless you're a big mega corporation that's lost its way. That's about the longest product release cycle that you're going to be working with. And I just think it's because of that. It's because you have to work like that, in spite of the fact that there is this long-term vision that you're working against. I think that it's really just about keeping the core business strategies at the forefront of your mind, and constantly questioning, constantly asking, why are we doing this? Is this the right thing to delight our users? Is this the right term thing for the long-term health of Fab? Is this a key differentiator? Is this going to increase our evaluation because it's something that nothing else has? It's something we've built ourselves.
So the first thing that Fab did was bring great design to the common man. Just say, hey, look, here it is. thing that you thought was unavailable because you had to go to a downtown New York boutique to find it, well now it's here and you can get it. That was the first step. The second step was making you feel like you're part of the community when they started adding the social elements. You could actually share your ideas, share your thoughts with other people. So what's next? What's Fab got in store for us?
Honestly, I think a lot of what's next for Fab is based upon our key business driver, which is to be a successful full inventory model. That's a big driver, and that's what we're working with right now. So Fab started out.
About full inventory, you mean I don't have to wait?
I mean that I've pre-bought everything that I'm selling sits in my own warehouse that I own.
But me as a user, I don't need to wait. I don't need to wait 6 weeks for it to be shipped or something. It's right there.
And it's really crazy how Amazon has created. I think most people in this room would know that what Amazon does is phenomenally difficult, phenomenally expensive, and phenomenally impressive. But to the average consumer out there, I think it's just becoming what they expect, period. Whether they're buying from Amazon.
Spoiled brats.
When Fab first started, it was almost entirely sell first. So that means that there's no product in-house. You do a sale on a short run, call it 3 or 7 days with a supplier. Sales over, you issue a purchase order. They're shipping product directly to the user, directly to the customer from where their designs do.
And that didn't work. Why? Or that doesn't scale. Why?
Because a few different reasons. One, you have very little control over click to open box. It's fractured. Sometimes you literally just don't know what the fuck is going on, and you don't have an answer for a very rightly frustrated customer. And as I was saying, in this new world, realistically, for your average supplier, and especially with a company like Fab, we're working with a lot of designers. The people that are going to ship reliably thousands of units on time, and the people that are going to design fantastic, brilliant, unique products, those are not the same people. And so, ink. I remember there's this great story. I forget what the product was. But the point was that he had packed everything with newspaper, and the products that he was selling, it was some sort of small tabletop home accent. It was white. Ooh. And everything arrived this muddled gray from hot ink that had melted all over everything. And so you can't deliver an Amazon experience unless you control the supply chain. And a lot of I think as well, the Fab user experience is really going to be dictated by that shift towards a full inventory model. And really, we have such greater control around seasonality, around discounting, around getting new products so quickly. And it allows us to delight users after they click buy in a way that's becoming more and more just a table stake, something that you just have to do.
So Amazon's got the best inventory delivery or supply chain system. What's preventing them from selling the same product that you guys sell?
They do. They go out and hunt and find a lot of it, to be honest.
Is it kind of mercenary? They see what you do and then they copy?
Yeah, there are a lot of people who do that. I think that it's a relationships with the design community. We have a huge team of buyers that are going out and constantly trying to find the latest and greatest emerging designers who are doing fantastic things, and we're giving them a chance on Fab. And I think that buying team is really the key differentiator. And also, I think that Amazon could never. The problem is that they would still have to sell everything else. And I think what makes Fab different is that element of curation, which we continuously push and really are very, very stringent about, increasingly so. And that's what helps. That's what creates our brand. Amazon's brand is based around best prices, best shipping. It's going to be there tomorrow. No questions asked. Any problems, return it. No problems. Their value proposition is based upon how they're selling their product, and just the fact that pretty much you can find anything. Our value proposition is based upon you're going to find great products that you can't find anywhere else that are brought together for you in a very curated way.
Actually, this case right here.
Yeah.
Is there anybody from Rulala who's got a good question? Mike?
Well, I think one question would be, you talked about how in e-commerce so much of the experience is the products you have. How does that play into your UX experience? How do you take it into account, and what would you say is different than a non-e-commerce company there?
Sure. So, especially given what Fab is selling, it's bright, it's colorful, it has a voice in and of itself. A big part of the thing that I always think about is how can I just get out of the way, and really just let the user just ingest what they're seeing, and really just not. I think it was in a pretty recent keynote as part of Apple's release, but it was this quote that I really liked, where it was technology is its best when you don't even realize that it's there.
When it's invisible.
When it's invisible, yeah. And I think that really holds true for an e-commerce experience where your product is your key differentiator. The goal of UX should really just be to let the user bathe in the delight of the browsing experience of these products and almost just not even be there.
So one of the things I found fascinating about anything that's curated, art space is another good example where you have a very curated experience for a premium design or artist created thing. There's the opportunity to have a relationship with the creator. What does Fab do about that? Because it's obviously not just the thing, but it's the story behind the thing, and the story behind the thing, and the person behind the thing, right?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, one of the concepts that we've been talking about a lot, and that we're starting to build product solutions around is content. And by that I mean it's just that. I think there are a lot of sites that exist right now. My personal favorite being Mr. Porter, that do a fantastic job of making you not even think, that you believe wholeheartedly, I cannot live without this $500 sweater. And obviously you can live without that $500 sweater, that's not a question.
No,
I mean, product for life. But what they do is they tell such fantastic stories around the creators and around what the experience of that designer and coming up with the idea, the fabrication of it, or maybe not the designer. Maybe it's more about the how it fits into a archetype user's life, and something that you can aspire towards. And that's something we've been talking about a lot as we start to get a little later. And this goes back to our earlier conversation about minimum viable product. That is not a minimum viable product, but that's something that we're starting to talk about as we get later stage. Is how do we start to create stories around the products that we're selling in a way that helps, especially for a company like Fab that is so heavily based upon the emerging design community, as well as the established design community. How do we tell stories about these products in a meaningful way?
Do you ever find yourself having to justify the UX decisions you're making, but on business terms?
I do. For the most part, I try to align with it. But I think one of the biggest battles that we have is around the definition of what minimum viable product means. And I forget who said it earlier, but what they said, that if it was up to UX and design, nothing would ever ship. That's totally right. I would just never ship anything. I'd just sit there forever. Nothing would ever go out. And when I have to often explain why I think that something that to a non-user experience minded person doesn't seem terribly critical, why I think that this is critical. This is critical to creating delight in the user story, in the user's flow, and ultimately this is why it's going to help you sell more stuff. And that's how I always try to frame my conversations around, this is the reason why this is ultimately going to help you sell more.
I actually saw some McKinsey research that came out today that proves conclusively, because it's McKinsey of course,
Yes.
that improved user experience leads to operational cost reductions and improvements in revenue. So there's some data out there in case we get lost.
And get that book and just pull it up.
Yeah. So one of the other things that was discussed on the panel was helping those people that aren't UX people get UX, and one of those ways is to introduce them to something like design thinking. We put our own clients through like the wallet exercise, which they do at the D school, just to get them to understand what the process looks like. Have you ever done that with your team outside of your immediate UX group?
Outside of the immediate group? Yeah. One of the things that I do pretty regularly is I meet with the development team and just talk to them about things that are 6, 12 months away, and really get them involved in the thinking on where this is heading, so they can start to really. I agree 100% that there's a complete blurring of lines out there, and everybody in their hearts, especially the consumer-facing technology company, everybody is a user experience designer. There's just ultimately people that are responsible to get it out the door. And what I always try and do is expose people to what happens, what's going on before they see a design. I've made all my team read through Dieter Rams' Principles of Good Design. And I try to read it at least once a week to remind myself. That's one of the main things.
Is there any kind of ongoing training apart from that reading that you would recommend?
Ongoing training within the team.
Yeah, I mean, like, how do you stay on, top? What's training? What's going on? Is my responsive design T-shirt or responsibly? How do you respond to that? How do you take? And I don't mean. I think there was a conversation earlier about trends, design trends. To me, that's superficial. But there are some meaningful ones like, well, do we need to have a responsive website? Is that something that's going to affect the user experience? How do you deal with that? How do you take that knowledge and implement it?
Well, with regards to, we also do a lot of market research. One of the first things that I always love to do at the beginning of a project is go out and see how others are doing it, what's working, what's not working. What do we like about this? What does it achieve? Why don't we like it? What is it making us feel? And really try to internalize that almost like first and foremost. We stop Dribble. We stop a lot of design blogs and really try to understand what's going on out there in the world. What are other smart people working on? What are the problems they're trying to tackle? And really before anybody puts pen to paper. I think that's pretty critical.
Apart from Dribble, any other sites that you visit regularly? Any porn, design porn that you're on?
That's another good one. I love actually there's a graphic designer who was actually a founder of Fab, who still contracts for me part-time. Her name's Viral Peters. She's considered one of the top graphic designers in the world. She's based in Belgium, and I read her blog religiously because she works with a lot of other clients now. She's kind of my idol for graphic design. I'm always going to her to see what she's working on outside of that.
I've noticed that Pinterest has become like a Dribble type environment where everybody starts to curate their own little collections and becoming a bit of an addict as well. Keith, how much time do we have? Where's Keith from? Another 5 minutes? When you're not working, because you suggested that this takes up all your time, but clearly they let you out of your cage to come here.
Yes.
So what do you do to stay sane and maybe not do UX, but around yourself out as a human being?
I take woodworking classes, and
what are you making?
at the moment I'm making a coffee table. my fiance loves this because she gets to have lots of
She
furniture.
gets stuff.
She gets stuff, and she gets to, she gets to talk to the, the manufacturer and really explain her needs very clearly, and then the manufacturer responds to her needs, nothing but her needs.
She always gets what she wants.
But yeah, I mean, that woodworking is a huge thing for me, and I exercise a lot. I don't think that you can think clearly unless you exercise.
Still cycle.
Yeah.
In New York.
Yeah.
Dangerous.
Yeah.
Just, from a team point of view, a team dynamic point of view, this might be a little too detailed for you to think about right now, but how do you manage your week? Like, what does your week look like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday out there? Is it agile? Are you doing Scrum type things? Is there a methodology? Is it very structured? Is it a little loose? Give us an idea of what it goes on.
Sure. So, well, because of the whole dual New York India dilemma, the day
Wake up really early.
I wake up very early, and the day starts out usually with 2 to 4 hours of reviewing progress on either in development projects that we're trying to finalize the interactions on or making small tweaks towards that are in process, or the projects that are directly on deck for development. And I try to make sure at the beginning of the day that we've gone ahead every day, not this one day, that we've sorted out what everyone is going to be working on in regards to the near-term projects that are on their plate, and then get that out of the way first.
And what tools are you using to do those things? Skype you mentioned. Are there other tools, Basecamp?
We use Basecamp religiously. I hate email. Everything gets lost.
Everybody loves email, right? Big fans.
And so we use Basecamp to track both visual and written progress on projects.
Classic or new?
New. And then the afternoons after India has gone to sleep is usually where we spend time on the projects that are a little further out. And this is where I get back into slow down. And we usually try to spend a few hours with everyone in a room, really laying out business needs, user needs, and then either assets at our disposal or assets that we need to. By assets, I mean like a product image or a video about a designer or an editorial piece around a product or a designer. And then what assets do we not have? And then that's how I usually try to frame every project before we start to get into wireframes, is around those 4 things. And then usually we...
Can you be more specific about wireframes? Because I think they mean lots of different things to us.
by wireframes, I mean balsamic. So
Black and white lines.
black and white lines, yeah, no nonsense. I actually like balsamic because the handwritten just effect that they put on top of everything. And they've intentionally made it, I mean, obviously someone there was very, emphatic on, this is a wireframe, that is not a wireframe, we're going to build a product that,
It's in fireworks, it's not.
Exactly. And then usually at the end of the day, we will do a wrap-up of reviewing what wireframes there are on the projects that are on like what I call tier 2, so not on deck for development, but then one step backward there.
And your personal management style, are you at your desk or are you moving around? What can we?
I mean, I try to. One of the things that I think is really important.
Let me ask you,
Yeah.
how do you currently manage and how would you like to manage?
Sure. No. So one of the I think I always try to constantly remind myself that the best output that I'm going to get is that if I let the team figure out the problem themselves. And it's really hard to not like jump in and try to solve the problem. And so one of the things that I've always tried to do and aspire to do more of is to really empower people to make decisions. And I think the way that you empower people to make decisions is by making them feel as though they are the last man standing. If everyone else just disappeared, this was going out to, you were the only one who was left to solve this problem, you're the only one left to QA it, you're the only one left, what would you do with it?
So you return authority to them and say, this is your problem to solve. I'm not going to give you any solutions, but I'm here to support you.
Exactly. I mean, it's obviously, and that's a hard thing to do consistently when you have tight deadlines, and sometimes I have to hurt people's feelings and dig in and just kind of say, okay, we're doing this. But I try not to do that whenever.
Sounds like raising children.
Yeah.
No, I didn't do that.
So your plans are to stay with Fab in New York. Any chance we'll ever see you back in Boston?
Yeah, totally. It's funny. I never. I mean, for good. Not. You mean not just to visit? You mean like come back for?
Yeah,
really?
good.
Oh dear.
Can steal you back.
I don't know. Hallie's, my fiance, is very afraid of the cold. That can be hard. I don't know. Probably not. I would say. I think it's going to be a visit when the sun is out, when the sun's on the ground.
Another office in Miami or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Fab's got a European office, right?
Yeah.
Is that a completely separate business, or do they use the same website as the .com?
No, it's on the same domain, but it's eu.fab.com. Just in order to manage inventory, it can't be the same. It's a different product offering. When inventory comes into one location, it's different when it's come into another location. Sometimes there are a lot of restrictions on what you can sell and what you can't in different regions. So as much as we try to aspire to have a homogeneous product offering across the two stores, it's just not feasible to hit 100% on that.
Are there a lot of cultural differences that you need to take into consideration as you're designing for each of those websites?
I honestly don't think so. I think that it's
People are people.
yeah. I think it would depend based on the product, but in my case, with an understanding that my role is to get out of the way of the great products that are available. My job is really just to keep things as simple as possible and get out of the way. So with that in mind, I don't think it's a terribly strong geographic bias.
So your job is basically to do as little as possible.
Yeah, it's a good job, right?
Great, UX is awesome. Keith, are we done?
Yeah, take a couple questions.
Yeah, any questions from the crowd? Anybody want to ask Devin what his middle name is, or something more important to know?
Yeah, so this is less of a UX question and more of a Fab.com question. I just want to have your thoughts on what do you think about replicas of Fab.com coming in emerging markets, funded by the famous German brothers, but no offense to any Germans, but I'm referring to Rocket Internet Ventures. What do you think about that?
I love it.
Flattering.
I think that it's a good indicator that Rocket is probably like the best indicator you could ever have that you have a good idea. And they're going to market in they're going to market in the next market before you can get there. From a design perspective, I don't love like the hardcore knockoffs. Rocket's knockoff of Fab was crazy. They took the front end HTML code and just made a site out of it. It was pretty wild.
Wasn't there some legal action?
What?
I think there was a little bit of legal action associated with that, right?
Not with that one. There was legal action associated with Touch of Modern. But with Rocket, we actually we acquired a German startup that was doing a similar thing, and that's how we built our European business to compete against them. But it out of business. Sure.
Another question.
Hi. So you talked a lot about delighting users when you're designing, and you mentioned some things like fast shipping, which are kind of inherently part of the workflow that users have to go through, and that are good to optimize. But what about things more like the designer stories you were talking about, or whenever you buy something from Chad, you get like a nice little black card, like a little design one that says "Thank you for your purchase." And so, how do you come up with ideas like that?
Did everybody hear the question?
Sorry.
I'll just repeat it in case. So, Fab's got the whole experience has been thought through, even down to the packaging and the little notes that go inside the boxes. Obviously, that's part of the big experience. Is that part of your role as well?
No, the most of the physical marketing is being taken care of by the marketing team. it's a two-way street. I'm involved and I give my 2 cents, but ultimately someone's got to be responsible for it.
So there's obviously a grey area there. There's some blurring, and as companies evolve from being purely digital to having a physical presence, they're going to bump into this thing more and more often. Do you imagine that ultimately it becomes all of yours, or do you think that there's always a separation between the digital and the physical?
I wouldn't say that. I think that it's two groups that have to work very strongly together with a common understanding of what we're trying to accomplish. But as far as being the same team, I mean, especially when you get into physical retail, that's an entirely different background, an entirely different skill set. No, I don't ultimately see it being under if it needs to be under the same, if something like that needs to be under, those two things need to be under the same roof. The company has done a good job of broadcasting and making its employees understand what it's all about.
Another question?
Speaking of blurred lines, a lot of people, especially, a lot of people, especially people new to the whole UX, they'll ask what's the difference between UX and UI, and would either one of you like to explain that?
Sure. Yeah, like it depends who you would ask. What I would say is that I would define UI as the output of UX. That user experience is around defining what you're trying to solve, how you're trying to solve it, what are the emotions you're looking to evoke, what are the business and product requirements that you need to meet, and then UI is really against that, what's the final product. And I think that, especially when you get into the two polar sides of that scale, you can find folks that are sometimes really polarly on one side and other folks that really fit in the middle. And it's really just, I think that the definition of that and also the definition of someone's role as a UX designer is really dependent upon where they find themselves along that spectrum. And it's not necessarily the same person is not necessarily going to be fantastic at both of those things. Actually, in a lot of cases, the person that's going to be, that fantastic, pixel perfect, badass graphic designer is not the person that you're going to want to think through a lot of the more UX focused problems with. So.
And it's guys like this who need to identify that and know who fits into which role. Another question. Keith?
Since you spent time in both Boston and New York now, like, is there something, I guess more of an ego?
This is not a baseball question.
So, is there something that you noticed in New York, whether that's the design community or the just New York tech ecosystem, that was like, wow, I wish they did that in Boston?
Yeah, I mean, I think that New York is a really different tech ecosystem than Boston. I think because it is part of a city that in a lot of ways is connected with design, whether it's fashion or architecture or art. I mean, it almost in a lot of ways viewed one of the world's meccas for those pursuits. I think that the technology companies that are coming out of New York as opposed to Boston, I see a lot more consumer-facing companies coming out of New York as opposed to Boston. I see a lot of SaaS coming out of Boston, and it'd be great to see more consumer-facing tech come out of Boston, especially around commerce.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other questions? Maybe one or two more before we wrap up.
So I'm not a user of Fab, but I now realize you've got desktop, you've got mobile optimized site, you've got app experience.
We don't have a mobile optimized site. I want to do it, but no one will give me the time.
Found something. But so what's your philosophy in terms of aligning that experience, but also recognizing that people at different times have different problems and maybe acting more at whim versus being back?
It's a great question. And yeah, well said, acting on a whim versus leaning back. But I always think the difference between web and mobile is a certain sense of urgency. and maybe urgency is not exactly the right word, but I'm on the go. I don't have time to sit. I equate a web experience a lot like reading a magazine. It's much more relaxed. I'm much more open.
Even a desktop or laptop experience. A desktop or laptop experience.
Yes. What did I say then?
Just a web experience.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, to a desktop experience. I think that I'm open to a diverse range of paths that are going to be put out in front of me. I'm open to more content. Whereas I think on mobile, you really have to be much more, much stricter on what's critical, on what do I want to put in front of you right now, because I really only have a couple seconds and 4 inches of real estate to explain to you, where you want to go. And I know that you don't have a lot of time. This may be like these 5 minutes you have spared in your day as you're walking or sitting on the train or whatever it might be. So I'm usually looking to really like trim back an experience and really just focus on clear paths, only the essentials, and really recognize that in a lot of cases the user is going to be in a rush.
Would you, just to follow on, since you don't have an app experience, would you think about that similarly, or would you?
Oh, we do have an app experience, we don't have a mobile experience.
Correct, so sorry. And then are you taking advantage more of sort of the native features and ability to personalize and customize on an app, or still stuff, and are you utilizing the technology basically?
I personally, to be totally honest, Fab is a pretty heavy iOS used platform. We have an Android app, and it has never seen even like a fraction of the share that iOS represents. So I'll focus on iOS. But for us, I really love where Apple is heading with cleaning up. I'm personally a huge proponent of flat design. And what I think of when I think of flat design, I think of Bauhaus, actually, honestly, when I think of flat design. I think of a group of folks that really understand that the most delighting experiences are the ones that really are stripping away the superfluous. And I mean, maybe this sounds a little hazy and strange, but I think in a lot of ways that things like gradients, in a lot of ways sometimes even represent that. And I like where they're heading in terms of really cleaning things up and the cleanliness and in a lot of ways letting the products that they're building and the fantastic functionality and interactions behind them speak really loudly, while the UI plays something of a backseat role.
Okay. One more? Nobody? Awesome. Thank you, Devin.